He's a native Floridian who's lived throughout Florida. He attended Valencia, UCF, and eventually received his degree from Rollins College in Environmental Studies. He started his career at the Orlando Science Center and spent 11 years there managing their live animal collection, developing and giving presentations, and leading youth outdoor programs. In 1993, he was hired by Seminole County as a permitting and enforcement biologist, and in 1995, he was given the privilege to manage the county's natural lands program, and continues to do that to this day. So we're doing this slowly.
Yeah, this is a totally different program. If there's any computer folks out there that can get this up,
It's down here below. Along the bottom, there.
Yeah.
That one.
That
Yeah.
one. Oh, whoops. Back in kind of my old stomping ground, I think you said during her introduction that I started my career right down the street at the Orlando Science Center. I was there 11 and a half years. I've been with the county almost 30. So if you do the math, I'm sure you're thinking, well, God, he only looks like he's 25. I started at the Science Center at 16. And but even before that, I had my hand in this kind of stuff. I actually did have kept some of these species in captivity, mostly the herps, but a few mammals and a few birds too. But now, and for the last 30 years, I've been the program manager for the Seminole County Natural Lands Program, and unfortunately, if you're in Florida, you're managing land in Florida, you're dealing with these invasive exotics. They got rid of the word exotic, they just call them invasives now. And eventually we'll get that up. Right?
Are you going to turn down the lights so that there's a glare on the screen?
Somebody that knows this building can turn down the lights. So I'll just go. So what are invasives, exotics?
Oh, that's better.
How'd they get here? What are the problems they cause? And how do we, manage them? So obviously an invasive or an exotic is an animal living in an area where it's not native to. And Florida is second to, I think, only Hawaii for the number of invasive species, plant and animal, that have become established here in this state. Obviously, we all know why. Beautiful weather, lots of rain. It's a good home for a lot of those things. But the problem is, they get here, what's not here?
Predators? Prey.
The things that keep them in check in their native land. So they've got the food they need and the shelter and all that. They don't have the things that naturally keep them in check. So they can really become invasive. Oh, here we go.
So you can keep on talking.
I do this program about once every 2 or 3 years, so I don't have it quite memorized. On the front there, you can probably guess which one of those species we do and we don't have in Seminole County right now. We don't have the Burmese Pythons yet. Occasionally one is found here or there. But, all right, so to advance it, am I going to go over there and?
If you like, or I can continue.
Oh, that would be great.
Is the next one?
Yeah, but you're going to have to stand in the light. Thanks, Deb. So animals not native to the area, and usually introduced by us. In some way, shape, or form, they come in on plants, they come in cargo, a lot of them have come in through the pet trade. I think maybe a very few of them, we'll talk about a couple species that have migrated into the area, but again, it's indirectly because of what we've done. Things like lack of natural predators, habitat destruction. I always like to say habitat alteration. I have kind of a weird thing about that destruction thing. Being a natural lands manager and using prescribed fire, and you hear about forest fires, and it always bothered me when they said 500,000 acres, this is the 98 Florida wildfire thing, 500,000 acres of habitat destroyed, or land destroyed. Well, the land's still there. The habitat's probably in better shape after the fire than it was. So the species are probably not destroying the habitat, but they're certainly altering it. Competition for resources. You know, there are some, I'll give some personal accounts of just our little brown knoll and how it's affecting some of our native lizard species. Food and living space. You know, some of them are more aggressive than the natives and will displace them from living space. Of course, predation on native species can be a vector of disease. Some of our earliest invasive rats, the Norway rat and the black rat, were big purveyors of disease. And then genetic effects, mainly hybridization with native species. That comes into effect more with, say we have something from out west, the United States, and makes its way in here to Florida, some of those can hybridize. All right, next slide. Exotic animals in Florida. I just got this off the FWC website today, and I was telling Fred Antonio that FWC's they've got established, then they've got reported, then they've got previously established, then they've got some other, so it's hard picking exactly what to put up there. But you can see mammals, 13, birds, 97. I guess they get the award. That seems awful high for birds. I think a lot of those are reported, so it's a pet that escapes. So they're reported, but not necessarily established. Reptiles, 56, and Fred was saying that's today maybe, but tomorrow that number could change. Freshwater fish, and then saltwater fish. Next. And then management. So how do you manage this? I'd say it's a challenge. We used to say, how do you eradicate? Very few instances of an established species is it possible to eradicate them. But you can, like exclusion, you know, barriers, physical, electrical, there's all kinds of different things they're trying out. Some of these, you know, you have these exotic fish in waterways, you know, clams and mussels and so on. Habitat manipulation, remove the food source. Well, the problem with that is they're relying on a lot of the same food source that our natives are. And breeding sites. Trapping, use snares, nets, capture, relocate, dispose of humanely. You'd be surprised that even with these invasives, there's groups out there that will object to you getting rid of pigs, either feral hogs. I've had people complain to me about, well, why are you even getting rid of them? They're here, they've been here for hundreds of years, they belong. Hunting and fishing, it's great if you can find one, the lionfish for instance. I mean, they have the big lionfish events where, and you can eat that, it's good eating. It's probably never going to get rid of lionfish, but it helps to maybe control it to some extent. Biological controls, that's a big controversial thing. Years ago, it was done really quickly. I've got one example of that up on the table. You've got one exotic, they look into the native land. Well, what was eating it there? Well, let's just bring it in. Well, they found out, yeah, they ate that, but they also eat everything else. So now they put them through a long vetting process, 10 years or so. They make sure that they're obligate on that source of food. So a lot of our plants, you know, they've got the biological controls for the air potato, for instance, is that little beetle that only eats air potato. Pet amnesty events, that's FWC puts those on, and it's great because if somebody's got a pet illegally, they can relinquish it, no questions asked, and they won't be brought up on charges or anything. And that leaves that, because you know they pass laws that you can't have it or you have to have this, and they don't want to get caught. So what do? They just go out and release it. Next slide. All right, feral hogs. Difficult to control, and that's an understatement. Intelligent. They become trap shy. We have volunteer hog trappers for our natural lands properties in Seminole County. And I'll send them to an area because we've got recent activity. They'll set 2 or 3 traps. They'll catch 3, 4, 5 hogs. There might be a dozen more on their cameras. Once they see their buddies get caught, they're not going near the trap for a while. So then they have to leave and go somewhere else. Try somewhere else. Recognize individuals. They do that too. And then reproduce rapidly. I've seen a sow out on as many as 15 or 16 little piglets. Next. And this is the habitat alteration. And that's probably only a couple of hogs in one night. It can be pretty bad. Now on a positive note, being that I've got a long view of this, I can take you to areas at some of our properties where they look like that. And it might be 10, 12, 15 years later, it pretty much looks normal. I mean, the rain smooths it out, but it does provide an opportunity for invasive species, plant species to get in, because now you have bare exposed soil. We have had that in a few areas, but not many. It just depends on if you're doing a good job controlling your invasive plant species. whether they're going to take advantage of something like this. Next. Habitat eat native wildlife. There's video of them, of wild pigs eating, chasing down a rabbit and catching it there. Snakes, they dig up turtle nests and so on, ground nesting birds. And so they're competing with our native wildlife, and of course they love acorns and our native fruits and berries, of course our bears and our deer and turkey and all that rely on that as well. Next. Feral hog control, and I say effective with a big question mark. It's control, maybe we're keeping them from really getting worse, but we're never going to get rid of them, unfortunately. So we have live trapping. Of course, we live trap them, and they have to kill them to remove them from the property, unless they have a permit from the Department of Agriculture to remove them alive. Hunting, on our natural lands, unfortunately there's no firearm hunting. Our properties are really small, and so they're really just doing the trapping. Now we have recently got approval in their permits to use dogs. The art of hunting hogs with dogs has really improved. They have GPS collars now. It's kind of like the invisible fence, but they can load the property boundaries for a 1,500-acre property into that. And so when the dog gets near the boundary, same thing, it sends off a signal and it shocks them, so they know not to cross that boundary.
Aren't you still allowed to hunt dogs with a permit?
Depending on what land you're talking about. So every landowner is different. The county, the states, the
Because we hunt, and we actually get a wildlife permit
from FWC for their wildlife management areas.
Right.
Correct. So on our Seminole County natural lands, totally different story, because they were purchased by the voters of Seminole County under a certain guideline and rules, and there's no hunting allowed on that.
Okay, so I've seen the areas torn up like that, and you go, you spot that, and then all of a sudden, they're gone.
Wait.
You see the dug up.
Right.
And
And the pigs are gone.
yeah, you do a hunt, and then all of a sudden, like you said.
Oh, yeah, you do a hunt and they clear, and of course our properties are so small, even if it's 600 or 700 acres, you put dogs on that property, in an hour, all those hogs are off the property.
Right. So there's no hunting allowed in your area.
Correct, yeah. Okay, next slide. Coyote. How many of you knew we had coyotes in Florida? I think most of you should know that now. I picked up the first roadkill, my first sighting in Florida back in the late 80s on I-4 right near in Volusia County. And that was the first one I had seen. And they were pretty rare to see them. Now, they're everywhere. But they're not native to Florida. Let's see, we already talked about it. Natural migration due to a lack of competition or natural control. Does anybody know what that would have been in Florida?
Red wolf.
Red wolf and
Cougar.
panther. Both of those would kill coyotes if they got the chance. And they existed not just in Florida, but in the southeastern United States. And it was hypothesized that once we got rid of those, coyotes just said, it's open for business. There's a lot of vacancy. There's also rumors or fact, I guess, that they brought them in kind of like you do fox hunts. They would bring coyotes in to do the sport of hunting them. But natural migration, prey on livestock, a lot of livestock, neighborhood cats. They get sea turtle legs, even gopher tortoises. They have found small gopher tortoise shells at the dens where they preyed on the gopher tortoises. Burrowing owls. Compete with all other small predators like our bobcats and our gray fox. Population expanding. I think it's pretty much expanded. I think they've been documented in every county in the state, even in the Keys. They've crossed the big bridge to get over to I think it's Key Largo was the first key. Control. They found years ago out west, they tried all these methods of control, and they could reduce it maybe temporarily. But how do the coyotes respond to that? If all the resources are still there, food and denning sites and all that, now you've got fewer coyotes, so these coyotes are getting more food, so they're having bigger litters. And they get smart. So they found out west that you're better off learning to live with them and taking the measures to prevent them. So you don't leave your small pets out unattended. You don't leave food out to attract them. And we're having some of those same problems in Florida now. Even people walking their small pets on a leash. Coyotes have run out and grabbed the little small dog and yanked it, before the owner even know what happened, yanked the leash out of their hand. So it's really responsible pet ownership for that, and later on when we talk about the herps, same thing. It's, you've got to be thinking about all those things in Florida now. So learn to live with them. All right, next. A little bit about the competition for resources. You can see their diet, a lot of it is rabbits, rodents, carrion. So the rabbits and rodents, that bench there, those are all Hispid cotton rats, which is in central Florida and a lot of Florida. That's a main source of prey for a lot of our native predators, our hawks, our owls, our snakes, our bobcats and foxes. This is from the stomach of one coyote, one road-killed coyote.
Wow.
And I think I counted there was either 16 or 18 rats in this. That's a pretty big impact when you think about it. Next.
Hey, Jim,
Yeah.
why don't you come up here, because then you might pick up your voice better too.
Oh.
Yeah, the mic. The
Does
mic.
everybody hear me okay?
But no, for the Zoom,
Oh, but,
okay?
all right, so is that camera, it's up there, okay.
And that's our backup.
All right, which one am I hitting here?
Oh, just to the
Now you're
left.
gonna need to do short range. Just tap the pad. Okay, gotcha. Okay. The armadillo, 9-banded armadillo is another one. Not really native to Florida. Two theories how it got here. It was native to the Southwest and just naturally migrated across the southern United States. Also, some were kept as pets, released in Florida. They said there was 2 populations that then met up in the Panhandle eventually. So they're not native. They feed on all types of invertebrates. So when they're tearing up your yard, they're not eating your grass roots. They're looking for the bugs and the beetles and the grubs and so on. But of course, they tear up your yard, and people don't like that. They dig burrows, eat the eggs of ground, reptiles, ground nesting birds, and carry disease. And you know what the disease are known for carrying? They're one of the few animals, other than humans, that can get leprosy. And for years, it was always said that, well, yeah, but the human can't catch leprosy from an armadillo. So on night hikes, I would sometimes run down and grab and catch an armadillo and show it off. And then years later, it came out, oh yeah, you can catch it. I quit doing it. The black rat. And this is, I don't know, this is always kind of misleading to me, that the black rats that I've trapped and seen, they're not really that dark. They're really kind of a grayish brown. You might hear people call them citrus rats or tree rats. They do spend a lot of time climbing. You'll see them in attics, in the rafters of barns, and just up in trees. When I was at the Science Center, after the cosmic concerts were done, we'd sit out on the front porch, or the front stoop, and this is at midnight, 1 o'clock, and we would watch black rats sneak up into the trees and try and catch birds that were roosting, the doves, morning doves that were roosting in the trees.
Wow.
They're pretty tough characters. I've had them break in when I had breeding mice outside. I'd had them break into our mouse cages and just slaughter our mice. Outcompete our native rodents, damage to crops, stored food, grain, vector of disease. And there you go, there's the help. So how can we manage it? Well, of course, you can use the small mammal traps, either the live traps, I don't know why you want a live trap one, but the snap traps. Rat poison, I really don't like that. I guess it's still available out there, but of course, then you have something like this happen. I'm not sure what that would do. And if a snake ate one that had died from rat poisoning. But what you can do, and I've had to do it myself in my own garage, is keep things in even plastic containers. Don't work. They'll chew right through plastic. You have to use metal cans to keep the food stuff. And then, of course, don't kill snakes. Not just for that. There's an argument. I haven't met a red fox expert that could tell me which one, because I've heard people say they were introduced or no, they're native. They said they were introduced for the hawk hunts, and some folks say they're native. They said it competes for resources with our native species. The bobcat and the gray fox would be the only two that we compete with. And bobcats are pretty tough. Bobcats do not like foxes and will kill a fox when they get a chance. So this one is not really invasive. I love not this picture, but the next picture. This is the Gambian Pouch Rat, which was discovered down in one of the Keys. You can see from Sudan, Africa, introduced to grassy keys, size of a raccoon.
Wow.
So, and it's not real evident there, but eats fruits and of course reproduces rapidly, would compete with our native. Look, what if you opened your closet and saw that? Now, I'm pretty sure this was staged. Somebody probably had a pet one and staged it for that picture. But it gives you an idea of the size. Can you imagine something like that? It's cute. So I certainly agree there's a need for some regulation on certain species. But they've been documented to carry monkeypox. Could feed on bird, I'm sure they could. And not to feed our natives for food. All right, and here's where responsible pet ownership comes in for all of us. Domestic dogs, and some of it you might not see here. Uh-oh. Not wanting to. Anybody got any pointers? Computer expert? It's just not, there's things that pop up on this one, or not.
Just hit enter.
I'm just so used to having just a clicker. So. Anyway, so in Florida, I've never heard of actual feral dog packs, but I have heard of that in other states. And certainly in other countries, they have completely feral reproducing dog packs. And of course, and most of them are kind of tied to city, but every city's got the outskirts where they could be affecting the local wildlife, and of course spreading disease to the local wildlife. One of the other impacts that I think people don't really realize is, you walk your dog, mine included, I have one, and every 50 feet, what does he do? You think it's just because he has, my dog has actually learned. I would love for him to walk out, just pee and just get it all out. No, he knows he should be walked about 2 miles, so he saves it. And he'll pee 15 times. In a neighborhood, not a big deal, he's just competing. But you take him out into the field, out in the woods and so on, that's a scent marking, that's a territorial marking that might have some impacts with the local wildlife when they smell that marking. So if we can just even maybe
Skip that one, please.
skip that one and go to
This
the next
piece
one.
is frozen.
Oh, no. All right, so then the next one, can you guess what the next domestic animal is?
Cat.
Cats.
Cat.
Cats, yes.
Yeah, thank you for helping.
Are you gonna try to skip over, or?
I'm just trying to get out of it like a skate.
So domestic cats, and I would hesitate to do a survey. How many of you have a cat at home? You probably wouldn't want to answer this. How many of you let your cat outside? I would hope in this group there would be a 0. But believe it or not, I've known people that were avid birders that not only let their cat outside, but actually fed stray cats. Yeah, and I won't mention names because you might know that. But they are, I mean, and I'll speak from experience. Growing up out in West Orange County in a very rural area, we had farm cats. And those farm cats were well fed. They had food basically available 24/7. They still brought home lizards, snakes, rodents, small rabbits, birds. It's just instinct. And what I didn't say at the very beginning of the program is none of these animals, in my opinion, are bad animals. You always get a bad plan or bad animal. They're not bad animals. Most of them are here because they got here with us. They're acting by instinct. So I would just say they're an animal in the wrong place. And the same thing with cats. I happen to like cats. I happen to think it's pretty amazing that an animal that's been domesticated for thousands of years, you can just drop out in the woods and it can survive. Not a lot of domesticated animals can do that anymore. But again, that doesn't mean we should just turn the eye and they should be allowed to roam free. So keeping your cat indoors. Of course, there's a common practice now. I'm sure this group is familiar with TNR, trap, neuter, and you notice it's return now. I'm not sure if that had anything to do with the FWC rules of releasing it. It's against the law to release any non-native species, but now it's trap, neuter, return.
They just don't make it easy. Like, we happened to try to do that with a cat in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
And had to wait like 2 days for them to get there because we didn't use their trap. They didn't take it. So,
well,
you know, it's like.
Yeah, it's so, thankfully, most of these colonies are in more urban areas. Doesn't mean that they're still not having an impact on urban wildlife, especially birds you think are kind of transitory. And then, like I said, local herps and so on. But it's a very controversial issue, very politically controversial. And there are agencies, counties, cities, states all over the country that are passing ordinances to support that practice. A little bit of a story along with that, those farm cats of ours, and the other thing about, and interestingly, PETA, which everybody knows what that stands for, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, does not approve of TNR. And they've got a very impactful video that shows why. And it's these, you know, the average life expectancy of one of these cats is about 2 years. And because they get infections and diseases and so on. Growing up, we had probably 5 farm cats in 15 years. Only one of them lived past 2 years. We either found them dead or they disappeared. And we had one that beat the odds, and then we just ended up bringing her inside as she got older. But also, they would bring home these cute little mice, and we lived out in West Orange County in the scrub. And I thought, well, that's a neat mouse. And I was 12, 13 at the time. I was keeping it as a pet and looking at it, you know. Then I realized it was called a Florida mouse. You know what a Florida mouse is? And it's a commensal with the gopher tortoise, a listed species. Well, it was at the time. So our cats were, unfortunately, probably responsible for maybe the extinction of that species in that area. No luck, huh? We try and maybe eject it and just reload it. I would just say. Now I'm really running blind. I don't know what's next.
Can I ask you a question? Like,
Sure.
What if, you know, I happen to run into something like that big rat that you show? Like, like what are we supposed to do?
Well, first and foremost, if you know it's an invasive species or a non-native species, FWC's got a program called I've Got One, so you want to notify FWC. Everybody knows what FWC is? Yeah, okay. So they have a program. Now, your other option, of course, is to call one of those animal control agencies to come in and trap it, especially if you saw a rat that big. That's certainly not one of our natives. So yeah, that would be really I'm trying to think of any that would be really physically dangerous to a human. We can go ahead and talk about Burmese pythons, and I feel a little bit, I don't know, intimidated because there's a gentleman sitting over here that knows way more about the herps than I do, Fred. But the Burmese pythons that you hear about in South Florida, they were first introduced or first discovered, I think it was 79 or early 80s. The first one was found down there. And I think I was talking to Fred about some of these invasives, they exist here and there in little pockets or in low numbers, but then all of a sudden they seem to hit a critical mass and they explode because they're finding each other and they're able to reproduce faster. And that's what's happened with the Burmese pythons in South Florida. And people will sometimes play on the fact, and now they are certainly having a huge impact on the native wildlife down there. They've documented that. But people will play on the fact of the danger to humans. So have any of you heard of a Burmese python attack on a human in South Florida? A wild Burmese python.
They've taken dogs.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, humans,
Yeah,
okay.
humans. Fred, are you aware? I'm not aware of any. Now, have there been humans killed by Burmese pythons? Absolutely. Usually it comes back to irresponsible pet ownership. Unfortunately, even that little child, it just kills me that the little child that the parents had a Burmese python in their house, they had a blanket or a quilt with bungee cords to keep the python in, and it got out.
You got the baby too.
Yeah, it got big. So. And then there's been other cases where the person had the python draped over their neck when they were getting a dead rabbit out to feed it. Well, that might be natural selection.
There's an interesting book by Carl Hyacin.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read it?
Yep. Yeah,
It's hilarious. It's about one of those snakes on Trump's.
Click wildlife. All the top. No, wildlife, all the top.
Okay.
And then the very first one. There you go.
We'll just forget to see that, probably made it too much.
That's all right.
Okay, and just go forward.
I'm going to see if I can go past that.
Yeah.
No, wait, I don't want to do that.
Go on. There you go. There you go. Oh.
See, there was a problem. Darn it. Just start the slideshow from the slide beyond that one. Like,
Yeah. I'm sorry. I have lots of other pictures on there, but I've got some live animals too here. So I'll just go ahead and move on to those.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
So on the armadillos, last couple of weeks I've been out at Mead Gardens, and we've seen 2 different armadillos that were...
2 different types of armadillos?
Two armadillos, but on
two.
different weekends that had been killed
Oh.
by a predator or something. What predator? We couldn't
Oh, a
figure-
predator.
Well, something,
You don't think it was hit by a car? It was in Mead
oh,
Gardens?
no, it was in the gardens, yeah, definitely.
We had
And-
dog.
Domestic dogs or coyotes,
Okay.
and even though you haven't seen, maybe not seen coyotes, I mean, they're even downtown Orlando. So I
Well, like we
don't
saw
see-
one in one area.
But domestic dog is probably would be my first guess,
Oh.
for whatever reason,
So-
dogs.
Because there was a group of us who were like, what would kill those? So we were just curious. So
Could
thank
they
you.
have gotten poison?
Well, she said, sounded like they were preyed on, so they were
Yeah.
torn apart.
Oh.
Of course,
Yeah.
also, if they're dead, the vultures will also,
Mhm.
of course, tear them apart to eat them.
All right, I got one question for you.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons I came down here is because Invasive is on these Cuban frogs.
Okay. We'll talk about those. I don't have a Cuban with me, I mean, a Cuban tree frog with me tonight. I've got the bigger cane toad. Cuban tree frogs, they are not just here, they're pervasive everywhere. Of course, they were introduced into Miami many years ago. Probably came in on shipments of fruit or plants. They're one of those ones I was telling you about. They reached a critical mass and they exploded up the state. When I was at the Science Center in the 80s, I had somebody bring me one. And it was a big full-grown one. What is this and where did you get it? And never heard or saw any more. Came to work at the county in '93, didn't see them for years. But by the late 90s, early 2000s, they were popping up all over. And now, even out in very remote natural areas, if you get rain and you get some standing water, I don't know how we have any native tree frogs left.
Well, yeah, I live in a community, but, I mean, we have the wildlife reserve
Right.
by us, but they're lined up
Yep.
at nighttime on
Mhm.
all the shelves, and, I mean, this might sound terrible, but they said the only thing to do, because they were eating all my lizards, was to put gloves on, goggles, have bleach and water,
Ooh.
and you,
Oh.
and you get them. And they said that's the only way.
No,
you're
it's
gonna
not the
get
only
them.
way. So a little bit more humane than that is use the plastic bag, grab it, turn it inside out, zip it, put it in the freezer.
And freeze 'em.
Refrigerator, freezer. There's also, I think if you go on a UF website, Dr. Johnson up there has come up with a spray. But I think it's the same thing. The spray kind of paralyzes them, and then you still put them in the refrigerator and the freezer. And
Well,
then
we tried doing that, picking them up, but then they were just.
they're slippery. They're very
Yeah,
slimy, and if you.
And you gotta chase them, and
yeah.
I've got 3 dogs at home, and I already had one dog that I had taken to the vet and got seriously ill
Right.
from getting one of these.
Right. And if unfortunately, you grab it by, somebody will just grab it by the hand and you get that, and it gets in your eyes, it burns. And
Well,
I
yeah, well,
speak from experience.
From what I understand, it carries Ebola and Salmonella. Now, that's what
I've
the
never
web-
heard that one.
Now, that's what the website told us.
Really?
Mhm.
I've never heard that one.
I don't know what these Cuban frogs are. It's not the coquis, right?
No,
No,
no.
no,
This is
no.
a Cuban
That's
tree
where we-
frog. They get about the size of my fist or a little bigger. And they can be anything from a light, almost whitish gray, all the way to a green, and very mottled, everything in between. But if you see a tree frog that's as big as your fist in Florida, it's probably the Cuban tree frog. Our largest native is the barking tree frog, and they're about the size of a ping pong ball. Not that. They're kind of a chunky frog. But so that, yeah, the refrigerator to cool them down, freezer, and that will kill them, and then I just put them out with the trash. Go ahead.
Shifting the topic a tiny bit, and what about brown and nulls? I feel like I see those like every single day. What's their story?
And of course, they've been here probably since, the early 1900s, came over on shipments and so on. They've been in South Florida well, at least 57 years, because I was down there then and they were there then. They're also found throughout most of the peninsula, even up in North Florida. The green anoles have seemed to kind of adapt to them, and there's been studies done. The green anoles tend to move up higher in the canopy. Brown anoles like to sit on the lower trunks of trees, dart down for their food and come back to the tree, or run up the tree for escape. One thing that I've seen in my almost 30 years with Seminole County, unfortunately, is the native little fence lizards. Out in our sandhill and our scrub habitats, they fill that exact same niche. They would sit on the bottom of especially turkey oak trees and sandpine trees and basically dart down for food. Jump ahead 25 years, I walk out to those same properties, it's a brown anole sitting on all those trees.
Now, are those
And
more
you almost
lizard-
can't buy a fence lizard anymore out there.
Yeah, you barely see
Are they
them.
more lizard looking or more like a, because someone's telling me they look
So
more like a slug?
no, the native fence lizard looks, if you guys have seen a bearded dragon, you guys don't know?
Yeah.
It looks like it's a little spiny lizard. And it's an interesting story that at one time the high, dry, arid stuff in Florida, scrub and sandhill, it was actually connected throughout the whole southern United States out to the southwest before glaciation in the Mississippi. When all that happened, our scrub species in Florida became isolated. But things like the fence lizard, we have two species here in Florida, the fence lizard and the scrub lizard. Their closest relatives are basically out west. It's the Florida mouse I told you about. For years they lumped it with our native cotton mice and deer mice. They realized they're not. Their closest relative is in Mexico. And again, it was that connection. Scrub jays, where else do you have scrub jays other than Florida?
The West.
yeah.
Out west. Gopher tortoises. Question?
When I was a little girl, I was raised in Tampa, and we had what we call chameleons. Are those anoles too?
So those are anoles. We do now have true chameleons established in South Florida in some areas.
Yeah, but
What's
there
that?
aren't any of those
Oh,
here,
really?
are there? The green ones? The green ones, do we have any in this area?
Oh, the green anoles?
Yeah, I never seen
Yeah, they're
them.
still around.
Okay.
Like I said, even with the brown anoles, they've adapted, and you'll usually see them higher.
Huh.
So you're saying there's an area in Winter Park where they're reproducing?
I was told, there's pamphlets they have sold at
Yep.
the pet store there.
Right.
They told me that they come from, that people catch them in like
Wow.
Altamont, Winter Park or somewhere around.
That's news to me. In the back there.